Hello, my name is Jane McAllister. I'm a course leader of BA Architecture at London Metropolitan University. My research is on city farms, and the paper I'm giving today is called Socio-spatial Practices of Wellbeing, authors of Civic Ecologies. The Office of National Statistics bases its qualitative assessment of well-being on a fine-grained analysis of a borough's physical, cultural, and economic conditions. The overall sense of well-being therefore weaves how well an individual lives and their aspirations across a weft of their ability to direct these to a good end. Well-being is also an acclaimed experience of those working and volunteering on city farms, but the institutional conditions are different. Characteristically, the land has little or no commercial value, and their material development depends on generosity. As institutions, city farms thus provide very different insights into what it is to live well and what is good. City farms are local, not-for-profit, imperfect microcosms of the city. Microcosms because their spheres of action involve mending, making, network, and governing, and thus rely on different horizons of involvement. Imperfect because their futures are uncertain. They are dependent on the gifting of land and labour. Initiated at local level, city farms steward long-term community engagement with their surroundings through local involvement, with a desire to repair the physical, social, and cultural landscape. Then, once established, they foster belonging within the locality, forming a centre from which to engage other local networks, where mending and making nurture well-being through indigenous social practices to form identities, and from there, networks develop, securing policies across their borders. This thesis argues several points. Firstly, city farms characterize well-being in accordance with the ecology of their local settings. Secondly, the settings and their practices facilitate a network across different scales and horizons of involvement to fulfill a hierarchy of needs, individual, community, and institutional. Thirdly, against the backdrop of state institutions and corporate bodies, spatial practices responsible for well-being potentially author city farms as sites of civic ecologies. Their governance facilitates an environment in which an individual is free to pursue and attain a good life. To discuss these points, this paper argues that common to city farms are four spheres of action intent on repairing a perceived local absence or imperfection. First, regarding the physical and social landscape. Second, the skills and practices. Third, networks of knowledge connecting these practices. And fourth, the systems of governance allowing for policy making beyond the periphery of the farm. These evolved to create an ethically sustainable environment, to empower individuals within its community and influence policy. Therefore, the agents, socio-material conditions, actors, individuals, and their actions, practices, for each local setting bring character and perspective to the scales of involvement, initiating and closing the loop with the spheres of action. The Thesis critical methods argues, 1, the combination of agency, socio-material characteristics of the site, and actors, what individuals do, particularizes the character of spheres of action in the production of well-being. The actions, what the farm does, validates these spheres of actions in the production of the farm as a civic ecology. The thesis employs the philosophies of social anthropologist and critical theorist Pierre Bourdieu, psychologist Abraham Maslow, and legal, moral, and political theorist Joseph Raz to argue the individual's social capital, their needs, and the role of the farm as an institution in facilitating the good life. The questions then are, What do city farms do for there to be such a perception of well-being? What theoretical and practical methods are needed to explore the question? How can these be optimized, and what possible value does this offer society? The practical methodology documents the socio-spatial practices of actors and their actions within the setting, whereby the resilience of their practices become actions contributing to the spheres of action. These are documented within two diagnostic toolboxes. The first toolboxes, the actors, what individuals do, in terms of their histories, socio-cultural dispositions, skills, and motivations. It comprises ethnographic portraits of the actors' journeys in relation to their personal setting, home, farm, and neighborhood, and their involvement with the farm. Theoretically, these firstly employ Bourdieu's field and cultural capital, according to the individual's ability to engage and contribute to the farm's spheres of actions. Secondly, they offer a perception of the individual's sense of autonomy and well-being given by the farm, and thus calibrate their engagement belonging and belonging within the hierarchy of needs. The second toolbox, actions, what city farms do, comprise podcasts, workshops, and live projects. The nature, frequency, and scale of the actions, who and what they involve, individuals, community, networks, or government policy, describes the extent of the farm's offer to the local and wider public within the four spheres of action. Maslow, Nussbaum, and Aristotle agree that well-being and eudaimonia is achieved when the individual can access all levels of the hierarchy of needs, i.e., how well they can engage with the four spheres of action. So, the ability of the actors to engage with the projects offered and the sense of well-being this brings describes how well the socio-spatial practices fit the setting and the potential for an ecologically robust system to develop. The task is to evidence the extent an individual may become meaningfully involved in all spheres of action, identify where the gaps exist, and suggest how to optimize their practices to fulfill these. From there on, it is to show how, as how collectives of practices they form civic ecologies and what value they offer society. So I'm going to talk about the agents first of all, which I am terming as agents as economic, social, topographic, animate, and histories. This is a map of Kentish of London, showing the city farms up until mid-1990s, and you can see that they run along a line of which kind of thresholds the indices of deprivations between that which is high and that which is low. We also notice that the city farms are often stewarded by people that come from an arts background, but in low income areas. Okay, so these are the 5 city farms I'm looking at, and it's to show that they're on land which has little commercial value. They're wrapped around railway tracks. They're on floodplains, and they're part of spoils from the docklands. Just looking at it in finer grain, the Oxford City Farm is on a floodplain here. You can see where it is here, and on the other map, Kentish Town shows how it's wrapping itself round, but it's in an area of really high noise pollution and also pollution from the trains. Just looking at the histories, Kentish Town is one of the first city farms to be developed, and in 1972 it came into fruition, but it started off slightly earlier in the 60s on a site that was was a little lower down in Kentish Town on a site called Talacre, and set up by a couple of people, Ed Berman and Cedric Price. Ed came from a theatre background, and Cedric Price was an architect. And they funded a new building called the Interaction Centre. And it really, through theatre and through play, it kind of really activated the area. But it also, it taught people skills, but skills that were not just about, for instance, physical skills. It set them up with entrepreneurial skills as well, so that they could access these kind of full range of kind of what I'm calling spheres of action, and empower themselves and get a sense of well-being from that. Here we are, there's a little quotation up here from a newspaper talking about working as a motor mechanic, but actually managing to develop cooperative skills as well, to create their own businesses. So what do individuals do? I've been looking at or working with people on the farm. So I'm taking 7 people from each of the farm and interviewing them, asking them particular questions about what gives them a sense of well-being at home, on the farm, and in their neighbourhood, but also asking them about their journey, how they've actually come to be at the farm as well, and looking at this in relation to kind of accumulation of cultural capital and skills, in terms of a sense of well-being with that. So this on the Kentish Town City Farm, it identifies places where people have noted they are actually interested in the farm, and how they've actually worked in that particular area. This is Chris's cartoon, as I've called them, or ethnographic portrait. He was interested in edges, and he identifies edges, rather than borders, as something which he likes to try and work across in order to introduce different social groups together, but also try and understand, in terms of it, in terms of plants and animals, how these are actually crossing boundaries together, and one of them is working with disabled people. This is Simone's ethnographic portrait, and she's interested in working, she comes from a theatre background, she's interested in working with people on the farm in terms of play and theatre. She treats the farm as a kind of an immersive theatre. And Diane's portrait, she's worked with the horses for about 30 years on the farm, and she works with disabled people and the animals, teaching them how to communicate between each other. And it's quite extraordinary to see this happening, how the horses work with people. In fact, they seem to have sort of a greater communication with disabled people than they do. So what city farms do. This is some research I did with the Oxford City Farm. Their site was on a floodplain, so it was actually a tabula rasa that we had. And it was to put in planning permission for a series of buildings that they wanted. So this is a kind of negotiated map showing all the different places and conditions of the buildings that were wanted here, through public consultation, working with farmers and also the governors. So I've kind of overlaid all of them to show how that process was shifting and changing constantly. And then this is a little building that I put through planning permission for them and designed. It was an outdoor kitchen, but it was designed as in the form of an IKEA flat pack, which in a way what I was trying to do was get a form of communication that people who were not necessarily professionally skilled in carpentry could kind of understand. And most people have tried to put an IKEA shelving unit together at home or something like that. So it was really about my role as an architect and how I would try and communicate with people that perhaps didn't have, you know, a full set of construction skills, but could actually read these drawings. And so this little building could be fabricated once it was on site as a flat pack, could be fabricated in a long weekend. Okay, so spheres of action. I'm going to explain a little bit more by what I mean by making network and governing in the context of spheres of action. Common to each city farm is a complex set of conditions and characteristics and that characterize each setting: land value and ownership, stewardship, scale of project, and local demography. Farm initiatives are motivated by a perceived twofold gap in the local assets and have an impact on well-being, social fragmentation of the local community, and affordable place from which to operate. All settings, repair and care, underline investment in people, places, and things. Then these become embodied in practices that contribute to the collective good and build well-being, which I've referred to as through these, well-being and collective good may be traced as a product of engagement between the site's individuals and communities. Rather than using top-down methods to measure the effect of local conditions on well-being, for example, the ONS, this thesis is interested in capturing a holistic view from the ground up. It therefore aims to articulate the project through these 4 spheres of action. The embedded research techniques set out to observe, explore, document, and articulate each city farm's character and its dynamic of activity. They note patterns, similarities, and differences in the way in which they support well-being. The thesis will argue that the farms create and maintain through symbolic and practice-based activities initiated through care and repair the conditions for Maslow's basic needs to be progressively addressed and corresponding goals of well-being established. In doing so, city farms strategically stand apart from modern infrastructures and state-run institutions, promising to become local civic ecologies for the cultivation and delivery of the collective good. So these cartoons, I've drawn in blue is Chris's cartoon from Boxhall City Farm. He had a kind of very long journey coming to work on the farm. In fact, it was quite global. On the other side, I've kind of indicated how I'm reading these as a piece of research. And the cartoons are divided up as into home, farm, and neighbourhood. So here, but also vertically, they're kind of divided up as spheres of action. So they work as mending, making, network, and governing. And these are the people down the bottom who have actually engaged with these ethnographic portraits and I've interviewed. For instance, Kathy, you can see number 1, she goes up through the farm with her engagement in the farm. And what I'm trying to look at is how the farm becomes a kind of mediator between what they do at home and how they kind of engage with their neighborhood. So it's always like a kind of stepping stone for them to gather skills in order to work with the neighborhood. Okay, so I'm going to just introduce my supporting protagonists here, who are Bourdieu, Maslow, and Raz. The critical method endeavours to be mindful of different scales of practice, how these empower the individual to flourish via networks of engagement which affect local policy, and how these influence the moral objectives of the city farm as an institution. Bourdieu, Maslow, and Raz, who have similar political views, approach the critical arena through different scales of involvement to inform the conceptual framework. Pierre Bourdieu discusses the individual's ability to engage and act in terms of their social capital, situating their practices in terms of habitus and field of expertise. Abraham Maslow discusses the individual's well-being within the hierarchy of needs, principally linking their sense of belonging to social capital and ability to engage with the four spheres of action. Joseph Raz argues for the individual's autonomy, their actions and involvement with each of the spheres of action, presenting well-being as a social and political construct situated within horizons of individual, community and institution. The part they play in support of the perfectionist liberalism is thus rendering well-being as an objective theory of the good life. Together, these form a definition of civic ecology in which socio-spatial practices produce city farms as microcosms within our cities beyond the human. If city farms are to achieve their claim of well-being as related to the good life, eudaimonia, happiness and flourishing, then it follows that the character and excellence of these practices must necessarily be virtuous in pursuit. Given this, we might deduce that the virtues of City Farm are an attempt to repair our modern lives, which Cooper attests ordinarily partitions our life between public, civic or professional life and more private life, where conduct is a matter of individual choice or preference. Okay, so to those watching and to the audience, I'd like to ask one question, which is, how would you describe a city farm? Thank you very much.